This program is a video presentation via Zoom of the Civil War Roundtable of the District of Columbia. Founded in 1951, the Roundtable hosts monthly presentations at a location near Washington, D.C., more recently at the Fort Myer Officers Club. For more information, go to www.cwrtdc.org.
I have the distinct honor of introducing Dr. Frank Smith this evening. I've known him for a long time in DC. I know him from when he initially got his small embryonic museum started at U Street, and then a later iteration at Vermont Avenue. And I know you're in the process of moving into a much larger facility in the old Grimke School. So there's quite a lot I could say about Frank Smith, but I think he could do actually multiple separate sessions on his involvement at the germinal embryonic stages of the civil rights movement in the United States in the early 60s. He is originally from the Peach State. He did attend Morehouse. He was involved as one of the founders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, frequently referred to as SNCC. And I did work at the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights once upon a time, too. And we looked with great awe and admiration at people like Frank Smith. And so, unfortunately, his breed is dying out. So, I sort of feel like I'm sitting at the foot of the mountain looking at and listening to an iconic figure this evening. So I do want to thank Bill Dickinson was supposed to do this introduction. He had an event he could not get out of, so he asked me if I could introduce Frank, knowing that I knew him. And so Frank served for a number of years, I think about 16 years, on the DC City Council. He headed up urban affairs for the DC City Council, and he is the entrepreneurial visionary who has really moved forward with the American Civil War Foundation and Museum, and of course, that fabulous sculpture, which is on Vermont Avenue. So let me turn it over to Frank.
Okay, well, thank you, Jim Carr, for being a good friend. Jim is a tour guide, professional tour guide. I think you all probably know this already. And I know him in that capacity too, because he brings a number of tours up to the museum. And we look forward to the day when COVID is over and we return to something called normal, where we can welcome all of your buses and all the other tourists to the African American Civil War Museum here on U Street, to our enlarged facility, which, Jim, as you know, will have a new statue of President Abraham Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation that will be placed in front of our new building opposite the Spirit of Freedom, which is located on the other side of Vermont Avenue. We look forward to getting that up. It would have been up by now, except that COVID slowed us down, but we intend to get it up before the big celebration that you described. And so maybe we'll find a way to say something about Lincoln and the proclamation. But I want also to say hello to some of my friends who are here. I've seen them already. I said hello to Michael Hill already, and Juanita Moss, and to Carl Adams. And I, over the weekend, talked about the Juneteenth program, which he just mentioned. He has a lot of information that we need for that. And our friend John Bassett, I don't see him on here, but he's one of our major donors. And I wanted to say hello to him and his family. Dr. Frank Cooling, who's been on a number of panels with him through the years. And then let's say I'm going to miss somebody here. But just want to call off a few of these names because I saw them on this list over here, and I didn't want you to think I was overlooking it. And of course, John O'Brien, who was here with us when we had our We welcome Lincoln to U Street, and hopefully will be here with us when we finally get him installed in his proper place in front of the building. We look forward to your support. I have been asked to talk. Let me just say thank you to the Civil War Roundtable for allowing me to say a few words here this evening. I do feel honored to be able to say a few words to you about something that has become really dear to my heart over the last several years, and hopefully something that an idea that's played a role in helping uplift really the spirit of America. And so tonight I said to Kurt that I was going to talk about redeeming the American flag. And so we'll play around with this subject a little bit. As a good Baptist preacher say, if you take a text, you ought to wrestle with it a little bit before you sit down. And I'll do that. I want to wrestle with this concept a little bit as we talk about the Civil War. And the events of January 6th, when the people stormed the Capitol and planted the Confederate flag in the great halls of Congress, actually brought me to this. I've been thinking about this for some time, but I'm now more convinced than ever that we have to, this discussion has to take place right now in the middle of this whole conversation. And so to start it out, I want to go back now, since I know Michael Hill and others were involved in the reenactment in the movie Glory, which by the way was a very important movie to me. As I started work on this in 1992, I can tell you right now, many people thought that if any African Americans fought in the Civil War, they fought with the Confederacy. They thought that because we all lived in the South. African Americans thought that too, by the way. Many of them were afraid to look, see if they had names on this wall, because they thought their relatives all fought with the Confederacy. Because they had pumped the Kool-Aid like many other people in America, that we believed in slavery so much that we would fight to support it, which didn't make any sense to me. But the fact of the matter is that as the movie Glory put on the big screen for the first time African American soldiers on the battlefield fighting for their freedom, and they gave me a chance to really say to people, well, you saw the movie, didn't you? If you didn't see it, you ought to go see a movie, because then you'll see what I'm talking about. But in that movie, I want to take you to the scene toward the end of it, when Matthew Broderick is having a conversation with Denzel Washington about the flag. And you all who saw this movie will remember this. They go through this discussion standing on the beach. That army has marched all night long, double time. They're tired, haven't had any sleep. And Matthew Broderick is trying to get them to the front so that they can take the first charge at Battery Wagner to prove to people that these men were willing to fight. And so there comes a time when they ask Denzel, what flag goes down, who is going to pick this flag up? So he's trying to convince Denzel Washington to pick the flag up. And Denzel Washington, who has been described by in the early part of the movie as a runaway slave who was, he wasn't going to make much of a soldier, says, I'm not going to carry this flag. This flag don't mean anything to me except misery and slavery, and I'm not going to carry this flag. So they talk about, have a little dialogue about this, and you all know the movie ends with Denzel Washington taking this flag up. At the end, everybody gets shot down. He rises up with this flag and hoists it up above his head, and he charges toward the front. Now the flag is an important symbol in all these regiments, because the soldiers who are in these regiments of 1,000 men or more look to the flag as a way to guide them to where the front of the army is. Now, and Denzel knew this too, by the way. The person who was carrying that flag was going to be a target. They were going to get Colonel Shaw was concerned about this, because he was going to be next to the flag bearer. He was a white officer leading an African American regiment, standing next to the guy who's carrying the flag. So these two people are targets, and you can see this played out on the walls of the African American Civil War Memorial. We have 18 African Americans who awarded the Medal of Honor during the Civil War. Most of them were awarded the Medal of Honor for carrying the flag, because it's a very, very dangerous job. You're a target, because the enemy also knows that if they shoot that flag down, the people in the back don't know where the front of the army is. So they're floundering around without being able to. So I want to talk about that for a minute, because one of my arguments that I'll develop here tonight is that it took the heroic efforts of people like Denzel Washington and another 150,000 African Americans who joined President Abraham Lincoln. I'm pointing out those 150,000 because those 150,000 of our 200,000 names on our wall were enslaved when the war started. They were living in the states of the Confederacy. And it took this army to join President Lincoln in the war to defeat slavery and to wipe that stain from the American Constitution. And so when so that flag became the Civil War, let's say, cleansed this flag of its history of slavery and chattel slavery that was recognized in the Constitution in those words that we know that are embedded in the Constitution. Now this flag also stood for some majestic words that were declared in the Declaration of Independence that says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We know that the men who wrote those words, many of them brought slaves with them to the convention where they were writing these documents. And we also know that in the Constitution that they developed along the way, they had Article 4, Section 2 in the Constitution that would state that no person held to service or labor in one state under the laws of another state, blah, blah, blah. That would get interpreted later in the Dred Scott decision as words that meant that the founding fathers never meant that that Black people in America, neither slave nor free, would be citizens of this country. So up until this point now, this flag is flying over a Constitution. It's flying over these majestic words. It's flying over a Constitution. It is flying over a hell of a document, which I think is it's what people say it is. It is an important historic document that was designed to be new and creative. It says that we're going to have a society where everybody has this equal rights. They can serve in the military. They can serve Congress. They can be president. They can be teachers and all kind of other things. Except that those words meant also that African Americans, Black people, 3.9 million enslaved Blacks who were living here in the United States, were not covered by those words until we get to 1865, when we finally when the Civil War is finally over, Congress finally passes the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and African Americans now can be citizens of the United States, and we can also enjoy, as the court would say in Plessy versus Ferguson, the people, the framers of the 14th Amendment intended to provide. They used the word absolute. Very interesting. They used the word absolute in that decision. Absolute political equality among the races. And they just say you can have absolute political equality in a separate but equal society. So we go from the end of chattel slavery into a period of Reconstruction to a point now where the courts have established something called separate but equal in a society where people can have their rights. And I suppose that might have happened if some people have been willing to accept Black people as citizens and as equals. That might have happened. But you all probably know by now, I was born in 1942. I'm 79 years old. I was born in Georgia. It was separate, but it was not equal. It was separate, but it was not equal. It was separate, but not only was it separate and not equal, but any white person, as you saw on the back of that truck down in Douglasville, in that little town in Georgia, any white person could enforce segregation. They could walk up to you on a bus and tell you had to move. You don't have a place here. You got to go someplace else. And you couldn't enter the schools. You couldn't enter the churches. You couldn't eat at the restaurants in this. And then not only that, but in my own case, in County, Georgia, where I grew up, African Americans had to walk to school while white kids rode to school. So it was separate, but it wasn't equal. And it would take another movement in the 1960s, the Civil Rights Movement, of which I was an active participant, to take over to get Jim Crow out of the laws of the United States, to the point where African Americans could enjoy some. But I want to also draw attention to one of the things that Douglas said in 1864, because that brings me back to the subject I started talking about earlier about the flag. Douglas said the Cooper's Institute, the same place where President Abraham Lincoln had made this speech, where he said that he didn't think that America could survive half slave and half free. Later on in '64, Douglas is at the same institute, Cooper's Institute in New York, on January 14th, 1864, where he said, this is why the Civil War, he said when when the South started the Civil War, it's a very interesting comment, which my friend Asa Gordon pointed this out to me the other day. He's on the line, so I got to give him credit for this. Otherwise, I'll never hear the last of it. But Asa brought this to my attention. That Douglas says at the Cooper's Institute, he's talking about the Civil War. He says the South seeks to accomplish by the bullet what it could not accomplish by the ballot in declaring war and starting the Civil War. It sought to accomplish by the bullet what it could not accomplish by the ballot. Now, Douglas uses these words, Douglas plays with these words in other places. When he's talking about the 14th Amendment, he talks about bullets. He talks about the three boxes, the cartridge box, the ballot box, and the jury box. And he's basically saying in this case, we need the 14th and 15th Amendments because these men, when they put down their rifles after they defended this Constitution and got rid of the slavery, brought this new birth of freedom that President Lincoln talked about at Gettysburg, at the Gettysburg Address, this new birth of freedom, they're going to need these rifles to defend their newfound freedom. And so they're going to need the rifles, but they also are going to need the ballot box because they're going to go back to these places where they had been enslaved before, as all of these people did, including Juanita Moss's family goes back to North Carolina when this war is over and they build a life for themselves. They try to build a life for themselves there. They're going to be building a life among the people who had fought as enemies of the United States, the Confederates, who are still alive. They were all let go by Johnston and by Sherman and let go by Grant as they accepted their army's surrender. They were let go and they were able to take their rifles home with them, and they would use those rifles to create their own little separate armies or guerrilla forces, I'm going to call terrorist forces in those states to try to battle these people who were considered traitors by those people back in those states. And because they had joined the Union Army, joined President Lincoln's Union Army to help defeat the South. And so they knew that Douglas knew that they were going to need the ballot as they put down their bullets, put their rifles down. They're now going to need the ballot in order to defend themselves. So Congress, because of their heroic deeds in the war and helping Lincoln to win this war and helping the nation to get rid of slavery, would support the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments so that we get not only the freedom under the 13th, but citizenship and the right to vote. And so we know for a long period of time, many of these soldiers who go back into these states now as heroes in their own territory, having assisted the Union Army, they go back home as war heroes and they get elected to office. In South Carolina, we have people in office there in Mississippi, 2 senators, in Louisiana, governor for a period of time. We have in Alabama, one of these soldiers who was in the Massachusetts 54th goes back to Alabama. A guy named John C. Carraway, who was born actually in North Carolina, but his mother was sold down to South Carolina just before the war. So he gets when the war is over, goes back to find his mother, who's living in Mobile, Alabama, around Mobile, and decides to become a resident of Alabama, gets elected to the Alabama state legislature. And it's John C. Carraway, who, as an Alabama state legislator, writes the legislation that sets up the Alabama public school system. For the first time in the history of the state now, there's a public school system supported by the government, by the local government. So these men go back home and they help to make their places better. They change these communities, and of course that doesn't last long. By the time we get to 1880, most of these people have been run out of office. Some of them are run out at gunpoint in places in Louisiana, in Colfax, and others run out at gunpoint. And so we now have this great legacy, which has been alive for a moment, and then is it gets defeated by the Plessy versus Ferguson decision that I talked about a little bit earlier in 1896, which set up a system of separate and equal. Now, let me just say one other thing about this Reconstruction period, though, which I want to, because I believe this is a period that's been as much as the enrollment of African Americans in our involvement in the Civil War and saving the Union and really ending slavery has been left out of the history books of America. I think this history of what happened during Reconstruction has been completely written in terms of the history of this country. I say that because I talked about already about this public school system that had been established in Louisiana, I mean, in Alabama. But by the time we get to 1890, there's 100 black schools in 100 black colleges in the United States, most of which are in the South. And by the time we get to 1940, there are thousands of schools and churches and schools in the South that are really building the basic background for the African American middle class that we know today. And I grew up in one of those churches in Georgia when the county wouldn't provide a church for me and my brothers and sisters. My church provided a building for us. And so I went to the St. John Baptist Church School. The coal that heated that building came from the church, from members of the church, put their little cotton picking money in there for Sundays. And then the coal that heated that church also heated our schoolhouse. And so our teacher and the county didn't pay us any money for that. They didn't pay the church any rent by that building. They provided at the same time they were providing buildings for white kids, but they weren't providing any buildings for blacks. So by the time we get to 1890, there's 100 black colleges in the United States. There are thousands of schools where people like me are walking and across these fields and valleys to get to a place where they can get a little bit of education. And then by the time I got to college in 1959, I got to a community big enough and motivated enough and grown enough so we could do something about it. And so the first chance I get to do something about it, I joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And then we ended up in Mississippi, as you've been told already, and eventually in Washington, D.C. But all of this is the effort to try to figure out how we, Black people, relate to an American flag, which for us has come to be a symbol of hope and a symbol of freedom and a symbol of democracy around the world. And I wanted to stay with that for a few minutes as I talk about something else. Tell you a personal story about this, and then I'll get back. I was in my second year at Morehouse. I was involved. By then, I was in the leadership of the Atlanta Civil Rights Movement, and we had a conference in New Orleans. So I got separated from my group. They went ahead of. We had this rule: we never traveled by ourselves. My group went ahead of me because I had to stay behind to take an exam at Morehouse College. So I went the next day, and by the time I got on the bus to go the next day, I was on a bus by myself. This was 1 year after they had passed the federal law saying that seating on these buses they banned discrimination seating on buses, interstate travel. It was the interstate commerce ruling. And so it was printed right up there in a little square, right above the doors. You got onto the bus. So I get on the bus to go from Atlanta to New Orleans for a meeting with SNCC. And I decided I'm going to sit on the front of the bus, on the front seat. And then when we get to the first little station, I don't get off. Second little station, I get off and go in there. And I sit at the lunch counter. Okay? Now, y'all might think I had taken loss of my leave of my sisters. Every time I tell this story at the dinner table, certainly my grandchildren think I've taken leave. Because I'm by myself. And it's dark by now. So I get in this, one of these, the first bus station, nothing happens. When we get to the second station, I think these guys are called here and said there's a demonstrator on this bus. And I don't get off because I can see in this little station, I see a bunch of rednecks sitting up in there. So I don't get off, I sit right here. There were some students in the back of this bus from Talladega College, three African-American girls. They get off and go in the station. And when they get in the station, these people go after them with all kinds of stuff. And then they run back on the bus to the back of the bus. I'm sitting on the front seat. So these guys come in the bus, they're trying to pull me out of this bus. The driver's trying to close the door to keep them from snatching me out of the bus. My life was saved by a white GI who was returning home from basic training. He was on his way home to Tupelo to Mississippi, I think past Christian. I know this because I was eavesdropping on the conversation between him and a white girl was sitting next to him. I was sitting on this side of the aisle, he's sitting on that side of the aisle. The only reason why they couldn't get me out of that bus to lynch me that night was because that guy found it. He pushed him out. After a while, he used his foot to push him out of the door. He said, y'all leave this man alone. He's not part of it. And that enabled the bus driver to take the door, close the door. Now, the only reason why that man did that, I don't know his name. I don't know anybody's motivation, except that fact that he was wearing the American military uniform. he knew what I knew. Putting on that uniform meant that people expected something better of him. I certainly did. And he saved my life. I never asked him his name. He never asked me my name. He finally got off at some little town down there, and I was glad to see him get off. So why am I telling you this story? Because I think that this has meant something to African Americans around the country. It certainly meant something to us when we were in the civil rights movement. That we would get arrested in these little towns, and what do we do? The first thing we do is call the Justice Department. Say, hey, I have one phone call is to the Justice Department, because we know the local authorities have already made up their minds about it. They already passed the laws that said we can't register to vote. They already passed the laws that said we can't sit in white parts of the restaurants, and we can't work in certain places. It's already passed those local laws. So the government's already lied against us. The local government has. The only thing we can do is hope that the federal government is going to enforce the federal laws and protect us. Otherwise, we're all going to get wiped out here in these communities. And it's a wonder that more of us did not get wiped out, quite honestly, that any of us are still around to tell the story. And yes, Jim Carr, it is true that every day there's fewer and fewer of us left. and I am blessed and highly favored to be able to be here and be lucid enough sometimes to say hello to my friends and to talk about something that's worthwhile in our communities. But it has been a long struggle, and it's been a long struggle on our part. So why do I bring this up today? I bring this up today because I do believe, and I'm going to close with this, that we are standing on the precipice of what could be a turning point in America. We have these progress in America has gone in waves and waves and waves, moved forward and some backwards. And I think that all these states that are passing these laws that are trying to get people off these voting rolls, all of these places where people are now trying to say they want to set aside elections in these various states. It just reminds me so much of what happened during this post-Reconstruction period, except now it's happening all across the country, not just in the South, but in some of these northern states too. They're passing these laws in Ohio and some of these other places also. But if you don't have a right to vote in America, if you don't have a right to vote in any country, if you don't have a right to vote in America, if you don't have a right to vote in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, in Ohio even, if you don't have a right to vote, you really don't have any way to defend yourself in this democracy. You don't have any way to assert your own rights and your own well-being. And so I think we owe a debt of gratitude to these African American soldiers and to President Abraham Lincoln, who actually put these men in service in a position where they could do something to help themselves with paragraph 8 of the Emancipation Proclamation. Brought these men in the military service and enabled them to do something to defend themselves, to push this, to change these laws in such a way that we can now get a progressive country where African Americans can vote. And we know this can happen because we saw it in 2008, the year that President Obama got elected president of the United States. I like to point out to people that the year President Obama got elected president of the United States, there were 18 million Black people registered to vote in the United States. 18 million Blacks. He needed 69 million votes to get elected president of the United States. Now, I say this all the time. African Americans didn't elect President Obama president of the United States. There were not enough of us. If all 18 million of us had lived in Chicago and voted 2 times the way they do over there, he still would have lost. He still would have lost. 18 million is not enough to get you to 69 million. So how do you get from 18 to 69? You got to reach across the aisle and find enough Hispanics and women and others, and yes, some disaffected Republicans who voted for him. I know some of them. Some of them were my friends who were Republicans who voted for him in both times, in 2008 and 2012, who voted for President Obama. So we've got to put that coalition back together, find a way to get them to rally around this flag and to stand up for what America has always stood for. At a time, even when we couldn't do what we said, we were trying to do it. It was written on the paper, written in the papers and in the great annals of Congress and in our great documents. And so we had to just find a way to make it come alive. Well, we're still in that struggle. I still believe that we will prevail because, as Dr. King says, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward freedom. And yes, I still believe we can defend this flag because this flag has been redeemed. It's been redeemed with the blood of all those soldiers in the Civil War. It's been redeemed. It's been redeemed with all those soldiers of the Civil Rights Movement. including Martin Luther King and others, and Paolo Liuzzo, and the 4 little girls in that school that got bombed in Birmingham. It's been redeemed, and it's one that I think is capable of being defended by those of us who still believe in freedom, who still believe in justice. And I'm happy to be able to say a few words about this today. And this story that we tell here at the African American Civil War Memorial and Museum, I hope you will join me in defending this flag, because there's been, I think we're in a moment of peril, and one where we have to stay steady the course, continue to march, and continue to believe in the great values of the country. Thank you very much. May God continue to bless all of you, and may God continue to bless America.
Dr. Smith, that was wonderful. Thank you very, very much. I will open this up to some questions shortly, but I want to make a few comments myself. I appreciate your opening my eyes to a different look at the flag. And one thing that you said was it represented hope, freedom, and democracy. And certainly I can understand that, but a lot of us looking from a different perspective, I think we've looked at it differently and similarly. But when you said about the flag flying over the country, and you also said flying over the Constitution and flying over the Capitol, and not the Capitol building. So it just opened my eyes, those two sets of analogies, how bad it was to have the Confederate battle flag in the Capitol. And so it just goes along with what you're saying, that was something that was against what a lot of us hope for and deem appropriate. So thank you very much for your presentation on that. Hopefully we do have some people that will take steps to try to make sure things like that do not happen again.
Well, you can see I've got mine in the back of me in my office here. It sits behind my desk all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do not have a lot of chat questions. So what I think would be useful is if somebody wants to go ahead and ask a question, go ahead and just unmute yourself and feel free to ask a question, or if you want to raise your hand, we can call on you. But hopefully we have some questions for Dr. Smith. I see Mick Bedard has opened up his mic. So Mick, who is our treasurer, and thank you very much, Mick, for all your service to the Civil War Roundtable. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I am cousin-in-law to John Bissett, and I will relate your good wishes to him. Could you tell me where the museum is in terms of organization, how close it is to opening door?
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you raised that with me. Yeah, we've been under construction and under COVID now for some time. Like everybody else, our construction schedule was slowed down somewhat.
Sure.
But it's actually been so it slowed us down. But also enabled us to raise some more money, which we needed to do. You know, what happens in Washington, D.C. is that there's so many hoops you got to jump through to get anything done that by the time you get finished, usually you got more project than you got money. And that happened to us also. but we've been blessed to be able to get some large amounts of money from some of this COVID money that has enabled us to close this gap as we also sort of restructured our project. We are in the final stages right now of negotiating with 2 best and final bidders on our work. Our drawings are finished. We should have our permits by the end of a couple of weeks from now, before Christmas. And in January, we expect to go to work. And we have 5 months of construction on the inside of the building. And we expect to get in there by the end of May, early June. And we'll be able to show off our new museum. Hopefully, if we can get this COVID thing out of the way now behind us, so people can come back out again, we'll be able to open up by June, certainly by July 18th, which is our anniversary. Also the anniversary of the Battle of Fort Wagner. So we expect to be there. And of course, John and Carol Bissett have sponsored one of our exhibits. there, and we will honor them in a special way at our museum. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, it's my understanding from John and that it'll be about the Tuskegee Airmen.
Right.
Both John and Carol were Air Force veterans, longstanding, and anything Air Force was very precious to their heart. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to having a Civil War Roundtable of the District of Columbia meeting at your facility at a later date with
Okay.
a tour.
Well, you got reservations as soon as we can get it open, and we
Thank you.
expect to have it open soon.
Oh,
Thank
so
you, sir.
that sounds good. So there is a conference space for to have a meeting there?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we'll have an auditorium, a real auditorium now with that will have new audiovisual equipment in there. We'll have we have retracting seats so that we can also have events there as well as to show movies and so it's a multi-purpose space that we put together there at the museum, and we're doing a special exhibit called "From Slavery to the White House: The Story of First Lady Michelle Obama," who is a descendant of Civil War soldiers on a mother and a father's side. So we're doing a special exhibit. That's one of our new flagship exhibits, and the one that is being sponsored by the Bissett family is a story about a Tuskegee Airman, a pilot who was actually who was flying a mission in Germany in 1945. Whose plane went down there. He was killed in Moldorf, Germany, and we have the documents from his family. It's the letter, the telegram that nobody really wants to get, saying your husband is missing in action, and then eventually the letter saying he was dead. And so we have a great photograph of him in his uniform and various other things that go on into this exhibit. And it's the Tuskegee Airmen who actually integrate the military. And I said this in my speech. I neglected this part of it, but it's the Tuskegee Airmen are the ones that integrate the military. In 1942, remember, the United States government itself is still sponsoring, the United States military is still sponsoring studies at Columbia University and other places that said African Americans were inferior to white people, that we didn't have the mental capacity, our brain weren't big enough to fully function like everybody else, and that people like Michael Hill couldn't be a doctor because he wasn't smart enough to be a medical doctor. And the government is still sponsoring these things. And so Tuskegee Airmen, of course, prove to everybody that they can fly these planes, and that they are, and they eventually are ones that lead to the integration of the military because of their own protests. Because you all know that every pilot is an officer, and the first Lieutenant Jimmy Wheeler was an officer, and these guys are officers when they're in their own planes in their own communities. They want to be officers when they come back to the base. So they eventually challenge the military. It's the military that integrates in 1949. Of course, the rest of society doesn't integrate until 1954 with the 54 Supreme Court decision, which knocks down Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. So we use this story to tell the story of African American involvement in the military, in modern military, and also in the modern day fight to get rid of the Jim Crow laws in the United States that succeeded the chattel slavery laws, and that helped to put down the African American community. So it's a great story, and we're happy to have. This is a case where we have a sponsor for a special event. We have other opportunities if anybody's interested in other sponsorships. We'll give me a call if we can talk about it. See what it looks like.
Okay.
But I'm excited about this. I'm happy to be able to work on this. And Bill Dickinson not only, but Bill Dickinson played a major role in this, in negotiating, working with me on this, and working with the Bissett family. And he's a good man. We love it.
Well, good. I look forward to doing some collaboration with you. May I vindicate Columbia University, because I went to the law school and it has changed. I have to say it is significantly changed now. As a matter of fact, one of my professors was on the legal defense fund for the NAACP, and it has changed. Barna, I see you've raised your hand.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
First, thank you, Dr. Smith, for your presentation. Excellent points. Much for me to learn. I wanted to connect 2 points that you made about white folks helping Black folks out. You mentioned the contribution of white folks to the election of President Obama. Very significant support from the white community as well as the Black. Also, to go back to your story about education at the state level, and you mentioned the government in Georgia not providing adequate funds for Black students to get educated in Georgia when white students were getting support from the government. A similar situation actually occurred in the state of Delaware also. A little different. There, the government was providing very modest support for schools for white folks in the state of Delaware. Not a lot, but some. So the white folks had some schools, but of rather poor quality. Enter a white gentleman by the name of Pierre Dupont. And Pierre Dupont spent much of his money to build outstanding schools for the Black students of Delaware. In fact, the schools were so good and so outstanding, the white folks started pressing the government to build better schools for white students. So another example of whites helping Blacks, and of course, Blacks helping whites in the Civil War. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, you know, the Rosenwald Foundation built 5,000 schools in the South of African Americans. So that's really, I think that's one of the reasons why I say this whole period of Reconstruction has really been underestimated and undertold about what happened with African Americans. You're talking about people who've been enslaved in this country now for 250 years, subject to all of that, the limitations of slavery, who come out of their period of slavery now able to function in society. They're not given much support. The 40 acres and a mule thing doesn't last very long. And so they're out here trying to make it on their own. And they have to be ingenious and creative on their way to some livelihood. And they without the help of organizations like these relief societies and these church groups, and of course the Rosenwald Foundation, as I said, an example, I don't know where we would have been, but thank God for all of that, that for people who still believe in America and wanted to see something good happening in the country. And I think I think that spirit still exists. I think we just got to find it and marshal it and get to work.
John Anderson, did you have a question you would like to raise or mention?
I was just thinking, there's a pretty famous white man who was president, was general, won the war, and then was so concerned about the Reconstruction period, as the doctor here has mentioned, had to send federal troops back in to make sure that the war was not going to be refought. And so I think it's in theme with what you've been talking about. It was pretty amazing, I think, and I think Grant suffered reputationally as a result of that act. But it was a great act for the country, and I think for the African American people.
Well, we found a way to honor Abraham Lincoln with this statute, with him signing the Emancipation Proclamation. We'll find a way to honor Grant too at some point or another. He was a good man.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, John. As a matter of fact, Dr. Smith was talking about the GI in the bus, and I've seen that theme repeated, not just with President Grant, but also during World War II. I'm not sure, I haven't heard anything about World War I, but it could have been. But even in other wars, Korean War, even in Vietnam, where GIs stood up for their colleagues and to make sure things got done for their colleagues and they were not disenfranchised.
Yeah. Well, the man saved my life. I don't know what you all can probably tell by now, I'm a big believer in God. I think God always finds a way. That's the only reason why I'm still, the only explanation I have for still being here is that. And, but this man saved my life. I'm convinced that I wouldn't have been here. If they had dragged me off that bus, I probably wouldn't have been seen again. But it wasn't my time to go. And so it was a savior there to help me out, which I'm always happy about. And, I still get a little nervous when I tell the story from time to time, but hey, it's worth telling. But let me just say one last thing about this. I have this iconic photograph here at the museum that I'm trying to get colorized. It's a photograph that's taken from the Selma to Montgomery March, and some photographer shot it, and they're just leaving this church. There's a bunch of people in this march headed to the bridge. Of course, the bloody Sunday hasn't happened yet. They're just walking away from the church where they had a little church service on their way to that fateful collision on the bridge at the present bridge. But the thing that strikes me about it is there are at least 5 or 6 people carrying flags, and these look like the flags that these regiments carried, Michael, in the war. They're on these long poles, and some of these kids look like they can hardly carry these flags. They're so big, but it's like they are carrying them on their way to this bridge. That is big, so that's like the only thing they have for protection on the bridge. And then that's one. I have another one that where we are marching from the funeral of Medgar Evers in Jackson, Mississippi. You all know they had 2 funerals for him, one there in Mississippi, one here in Washington. He's buried at Arlington. But because he was a World War II veteran. We had, after his funeral, we had a little march down Lynch Street. Lynch is named for the Lynch Street is not Lynch Street because there was lynching going on there. It might have been some, but it's named for that Lynch, who was the senator from Mississippi. And we were marching down Lynch Street, and then there's some hecklers on either side of it. So you got these African Americans in this march. We're carrying these little Union flags in our hands, waving them like this, and the detractors are over on the side with these Confederate flags. So we're going down the middle of the street with these, and I learned later that a friend of mine, Dory Ladner, who was in the civil rights movement, told me this story. She said that she, on the day of the march, I wonder how those flags got in this group. She said, I went to the drugstore. I stopped at the drugstore along the way, and I bought all the flags they had in it. It was about 10, and she handed them out to people. And so she said, we were just doing like this we were just stoking these people because we knew they were going to do something stupid. And but then you got these African American civil rights workers who are using the flags as a way to try to distinguish themselves. And who are they distinguishing themselves from? On the side, the people who are the detractors are carrying, they got the Confederate flag. So it's an interesting theater and the way the flag is being used. But I think that's, and then let me just say finally, I thought about this the other day, and this is what prompted me to start this discussion, because I'm gonna get some pushback from this as I talk about it more, from the African American community too, by the way. But I thought about this the other day when these people from Haiti who were sitting at the border for all this time got shipped back to Haiti. Why were these people trying to get to the United States? Because they still believe the United States is the best place in the world for people who, starting out on their own, could still get a chance to do better here than they can anywhere. I think generally that is true here in the United States. That's what the flag already represents, all of these things, the hope and dreams of people around the world who still believe in this. And I think if nothing else, the election of Barack Obama, if anything, proved to them that African Americans can still do well here in the United States. And I think that's generally true. But I think we're at a moment of crisis here in the United States. And let me just say, finally, I was born in Georgia. I'm down there all the time. My mother died there a couple of years ago, and my brothers and sisters were all there. At one time, there's 8 of us. At one time, only one of us lived in Georgia. Now, everybody's back except me. Everybody's back except me. On January 6th, my brother, who's retired Air Force, back there about 10 years now, when they took over the Capitol, my brother called me up and said, look, I guess you ought to come home now. These people took over Washington. So you can come on back to Georgia now. So he basically was saying, you might well come down here. My wife was in South Carolina. She called me crying. She said, they took over Washington. I said, well, don't worry. This is Washington, D.C. This is one day of flat. We'll have this all under control by the sundown tonight. The mayor and enough people will take care of all this. It's not a big, we'll take care of this. Well, symbolically, it was more than just one day of activity. It meant that they're emboldening people all around the country. They're going to try to steal these elections next year and do something real horrible here in this country. So we better get the vote here, y'all, so we can do something with that.
You still have some work here to do, Dr. Smith. That's right. Michael Hill, your mic is open. Did you have a question to ask?
Oh, and I just had a quick interesting aside when they're talking about education in Delaware and the DuPonts, because I actually went to high school in Delaware, St. Andrew's School, which was founded by the DuPont company, now a DuPont family. Now, the school was originally obviously founded only for white males, but I just thought that was an interesting aside about their involvement in education in Delaware in particular. And eventually, St. Andrews did integrate, and I started in St. Andrews in the late 60s.
Mr. Gordon, did you have a question? And then we'll get to you, Paul. Sorry.
Sorry, it's okay.
Mr. Gordon, I don't know your first name. I see ASAR Gordon. Maybe that's your first name.
Asa Gordon.
Okay.
I'm Secretary General of an organization called the Sons and Daughters of the United States Colored Troop, which is a liaison with the African American Civil War Memorial. Just an observation, want to note that in 1868, the voting age population for the president, Ulysses Grant, was 78%. In 2008, the voting age population that voted was just 57%. And just an interesting observation that the percentage of African Americans who had just been freed voted at a high percentage. In the midst of all that oppression, in the first presidential election following Reconstruction, than we were able to in modern times. So we have a long way to go to get back to where our brothers were even at that time. And I think we have an exhibit that's coming up to talk about the legacy that they left us. And that is Bullets to Ballots, the voting rights legacy of those Civil War veterans and what they meant to our democracy. And I just wanted to make that observation.
Thank you, Asa. Asa's working with us on that exhibit, so we know each other well.
Okay. Thank you, Asa. And thanks for joining us too. That's great. Paul, sorry I cut you off there. You have a question.
No problem. That was a more important question than what I have to ask. Dr. Smith, a friend of mine, Jim Brown, I haven't talked to him in a long time. Do you know how to get in touch with him?
Do I know how to get in touch with Jim Brown?
He was a SNCC with y'all.
Yeah,
Before my time.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't not right off. But I'm part of a group called the SNCC Legacy Project. And send me a little text message or something, and I'll try to find him for you.
Most grateful, sir.
I just haven't heard from him in a long time. I know who you're talking about now.
I know you do. Thank you for all that you're doing, did, and will continue to do.
Well, thank you.
Peace be with you. That's it.
Thank you.
John O'Brien, your mic is open. Do you have a question?
I do. I'm going to challenge Dr. Smith. Frank, we've got this Lincoln Memorial rededication coming up. And it occurs to me that as part of the rededication, we should make a suggestion to how the memorial might be revised to reflect this greater role in American society. Like the entire memorial was designed and built to show appreciation for Lincoln as the savior of the nation, winning the war. There's nothing there except the mark where Dr. King stood, talk about emancipation, to talk about ending slavery and standing up for human rights. I'm curious, how can we stoke some discussion as to what proposal we can make to the Park Service with regard to what should be added to the memorial for this rededication and going forward?
Okay, well, let's you and I work on that, John. I think that's a good thing to work on. I will tell you that administratively, the African American Civil War Memorial, where the monument is, the Spirit of Freedom with all the names, is actually a part of the National Park Service.
Yes.
It was built on federal land. It was turned over to the Park Service in 2003. Been on it, and it's also administratively it's under the mall, so it's in the same administrative venue that the Lincoln Memorial is in. So it should be pretty easy to tie these two together. We deliberately picked this monument that depicts Abraham Lincoln at the time that he has his hand there on the document, the Emancipation Proclamation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important. I think that's a message in and of itself. because I don't think African Americans give him enough credit for all he did and giving these soldiers a chance to fight for their freedom. I can't imagine what America would have been like if these people hadn't walked out on those battlefields, taken whatever the guns and whatever instructions and with the heroic leadership of people like Robert Gould Shaw, win some of these battles and win some of these medals. If they hadn't done that, I can't imagine the Congress passing the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
You make the point very effectively. Yes, sir.
So as a way, this is something we ought to talk about, how we get to work those amendments in too, as a way to raise up the value of this whole period.
I will pursue you. Good. Good.
No, that's a good question. Are there any resources out there? Are there any history analyses of exactly what you're talking about, Dr. Smith, about the contribution? I know there's a lot of discussion about the contribution, but not necessarily the contribution vis-a-vis the effect it had on not just a battle, but perhaps even on the morale of other troops or morale of the Union, to have additional troops out there that were fighting on the Union cause. Is there anything out there that has analyzed not just what the colored troops did, but also the ripple effect of their contribution on the war? For example, even, what colored troops did after the war. We've seen some books about one recently, Patriots Twice, about the contributions and the positions that Confederates took after the war. But is there anything out there on the colored troops?
Well, not enough. Let's put it that way. And I think somewhat because we just, this story. We used to say the Civil War sells in the South. And so what does that mean? That means basically the people who publish these books know that only Southerners really care about them, and they only Southerners really buy these books, and they only buy the books that are sympathetic to the Southern cause. So I think that has warped American history to a great extent. And African Americans and their white friends and allies just haven't written enough books to tell these stories the way they should be told. And so we're trying to find ways to do that. There are new things that are going on out there that I feel really very good about. There's an African American monument to African American soldiers now in the battlefield in Vicksburg. We're working with the city of Natchez, Mississippi right now to put together a monument there to a regiment, to a Fort McPherson, which had 6 or 7 regiments there in Natchez. Carl Adams talked earlier about what we're doing with Juneteenth, which is now a national holiday. One of our roles will be to lift up the names and the activities of soldiers who went with Granger when he went into when Granger went into Galveston in 1865 in June. He had just about 6,000 to 8,000 African American soldiers with him. He had three regiments, and we're now getting the names of those soldiers and those regiments, and they'll set up a website for them. We're going to invite their descendants to come in and send their stories and tell us about them. And so we have to build some of these stories ourselves, build out these stories to get people more interested in. And these things like this national holiday will help us be able to do that. And people like Carl Adams, who is already doing some research here in this Juneteenth committee that they're putting together. So there's some good things out there on the horizon. I just think we got to keep working at it. I've been somewhat disappointed at the reaction of the public school system about this. Don't know, America still teaches the Civil War. It's just all, in some states it's called Mississippi history, and Georgia history, and Alabama history. So God only knows what gets taught there. But it's and so this reaction to the 1619 project, for people they don't even want us to talk about slavery in the classrooms. It's just, I think, a setback, but I don't think I think that'll stall pretty quickly. There are too many resources available to these teachers and these school boards and these families out there with the media and all that stuff. So I think that was a temporary setback, but eventually we'll be able to break that log jam.
Well, very good. And I think Carl will add something to it, but before you do, Carl, and I see John's got something too, so you'll want to mention it, but just to give you a flavor for what you're saying, I just will give you this anecdote. I had a colleague that was from Alabama, and he said he loved the Civil War history. He went to with his father. His father took him to every Civil War battlefield in Alabama, except for where the Union won. And
We hear that all the time.
Right. So Carl, I think, and John, you had some resources that you were going to talk about. Again, I was curious about ones that really just didn't talk about the activities of the U.S. colored troops and what they did, but maybe the long range effects that they had on just the war and also after the war.
Yeah. Well, let's not forget that the first 3 Black regiments that were there, the 28th Indiana, 29th Illinois, 31st New York, they arrived in Galveston Bay on June 18th, but they were just the vanguard. 2 years after that, Sheridan reported that he had 30,000 Black soldiers under him and only 1,000 remaining white soldiers, and that he actually preferred the discipline of the Black soldiers over the white soldiers. And 2 of the units from Missouri, who also served in Texas, they built Lincoln University in Missouri. And they started collecting funds right at the end of the Civil War to build a Lincoln school, Lincoln College in Missouri. And now it's Lincoln University. And to this day, you can go there and see on their plaques that this was founded by the United States colored troops who had served in Texas.
Yeah.
John, you're on mute if you wanted to mention the book that you held up there.
Well, there are a couple of significant works. We'll start with C.R. Gibbs, just the story about the colored troops raised from Washington, D.C. That's foundational work. But then there is Freedom by the Sword, which was by William Dobak, D-O-B-A-K.
Right.
That talks about the history of colored troops during the war and shortly after, what they did up through 1868. And then the last thing I'd recommend would be a 2-volume work by Ira Berlin called Freedom, the history of emancipation, the colored troops, the aftermath of the war. That's an older work. That's about 1985, I think. But Ira Berlin was a great resource on digging up personal records of people who had fought, slaves. So that's an amazing work. Freedom, 2 volumes by Ira Berlin, the history of emancipation and the colored troops.
Well, thank you, John. Could you do me a favor or us a favor and send us a link to citations, or if you have the citations, Carl, if you have something too. We are recording this and we could always put it at the end of the video. And Dr. Smith, if you have some other materials you think would be worthwhile to add in bibliography, that would be great, because what better way to get some good resources than from the experts?
Okay, we'll be happy to do that.
If you want to get really into the nuts and the bolts of the colored troops, Bob O'Connor has multiple publications about Confederate POWs, like at Andersonville, colored troop POW at Andersonville, colored troop casualty numbers, the whole real deep dive into the nuts and the bolts of the experience of the colored troops in the war by Bob O'Connor, the guy who plays Warhill Lemon.
All right, same thing goes for you, John. Well, and former president of the Roundtable, if you could send us a citation to add to the bibliography, that'd be great.
An interesting addition has been a study that's called the Black Militia, which is actually about ex-USCT veterans who served in state militias in Arkansas and in Tennessee, and the role that they had in putting down the early arising of the Ku Klux Klan. As a matter of fact, in Tennessee, they were able to suppress the Ku Klux Klan and was able to effect the registration of freemen in the state of Tennessee. That's why Tennessee was, I think, that maybe the second state to pass the first civil rights bill in 1866, and one of the first states to pass the 1868 14th Amendment. So Black veterans begin to play a role in joining state militias. They couldn't get whites to join those militias, and actually protecting freemen and registering to vote in these reconstructed states.
That's great, Asa. You know, I'm going to repeat myself. Please feel free to send to admin@cwrtdc.org any materials you think would be useful to add to a bibliography. I see Melanie LaForce has just mentioned that, hey, we don't have anything on the Black nurses who were with the USCT. So Melanie, if you want to add something, go ahead and unmute yourself. But it would be good to have those resources that are available too. And Doris Keevan,
well, I would recommend.
Okay, Doris Keevan Frank is here, and she's a history professor. Maybe she knows a little bit about some of the later activities of some of the U.S. colored troops in legislatures or businesses or courts. Maybe I can impose upon her. She might know about that. But Melanie, you're on mute if you wanted to add anything. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Well, I just kind of, my questions are foggy because I'm not like, a scholar, but like I've been sort of digging around, and so like, for instance, I think there's a lot of hidden history having to do with African-American Civil War history, like Rebecca Wright, who was a Quaker spy who helped General Sheridan report on Confederate troop movements so that Sheridan could plot his strategy. But she was informed by Tom Laws, an enslaved man who ran groceries into the Confederate camps, and he would be the fly on the wall. He got the information for her, brought it to her at her boarding house in Winchester, and then she got the information out to Sheridan. So it was like, and she paid for it with having her whole family lose the boarding house and being ousted from Winchester, Virginia, and living almost in poverty in DC. But then she got helped out by Sheridan and Lincoln and President Lincoln. So it's like there's these stories that twist and turn, and some of them have to do with the interactions between those white people who dared to step over the boundaries, who dared to help out or who dared to do some things. They like that the shades of participation and the different ways that people, fought in the Civil War.
That's a good point. I know I've been focused on the troops, but we had a speaker. I was trying to find her, whether it was Susan O'Donovan or Leslie Rowland, talking about how the slaves who were taking cotton into town for the plantation owners also served to spread the word, and they were, of course, endangered themselves by spreading news. Yeah, there are a lot of people who have been actively involved in doing things aside from the troops.
Well, I think that the impact of this has, it's been phenomenal. I know Bonita Moss has done some work on her own family. She had family members who joined the regular Union regiments. Their names are not on our wall because they were not a part of the Bureau of United States Colored Troops, which was a separate branch of the military created by the military to implement that section of the Emancipation Proclamation. But in her family, in the case of William Steele and his family and others, the people were just trying to do whatever they could to get their freedom. No question about it. And they joined in numbers when they could join these regular regiments. They did. And when they couldn't join those, in the case of Steele family, some of them joined the regular regiments, some of them joined the USCT. And the ones that joined the USCT on our wall, people were doing all kinds of things to get their freedom. Nobody really wanted to be a slave, y'all. And this war became a chance for people to get their freedom and for all of their allies to help them too. And I want to just make the point here that you were making about women involvement in this, because what happened is that Michelle Obama's great-great-grandfather, he leaves Alabama and goes to a contraband camp in Corinth, Mississippi, because he heard that people from that camp were able to join the army. And so he didn't follow the North Star to Canada or here up north. He went from Alabama to Mississippi, which is not going north, y'all. I can tell you that. I'm a little myself. That's not going north. But he ends up over here in this contraband camp in Corinth, Mississippi. And at first, the army is not taking blacks into the army. So he becomes a part of the workforce. He's working there. And eventually they start to recruit people and let him join the Union. That's how he gets into the Union Army. Well, what the guy who's organizing the camp says that as soon as they start to set this camp up, they get overrun by all of these people, these enslaved people now who are coming to this camp who want to, a lot of which are women and children. So they use these people like Michelle Obama's great-great-grandfather first as sentry guards, and some of them were armed. They weren't soldiers. They were, you might say, MPs or something. And then he starts to recruit starts recruiting teachers to come down there to teach. So these contraband camps become the first schools, and they have an orderly process going with that. And he's actually, what he said was, these camps are being set up all over the South. So we're competing with people trying to get this people down here from the missionary societies and the support societies to come and stay here. This camp, organize these places into schools. And of course, one of those camps was located right near where the museum is located now, at 13th and S Street, northwest of Washington, D.C., contraband camp called Camp Barker, where a lady lived who was President Lincoln's cook. Mary Dines became his cook at the summer home here. And Mary Dines, I'm sure she slipped a little something into his coffee or whatever, because she convinced Lincoln to stop by this camp one day while he was going back and forth so he could see people who were going to benefit from the Emancipation Proclamation. So in my mind's eye, I have convinced myself that Mary Dines was the one that convinced him to put paragraph 8 into that Emancipation Proclamation, which says persons of suitable condition would be enlisted in the Union Army. Because that paragraph wasn't in there in the first draft. He got in there after he stopped by that contraband camp, and Mary Dines prayed over him and put her hands on him. He sang a few of them songs. He went back and said, you know what, I got to get these guys in the army, otherwise we're not going to win this war. So thank you, Mary Dines, for your perseverance and hard work.
I see Doris has got her mic open. Asa might have another follow-up question, but Doris, since I imposed upon you, I thought I'd give you an opportunity to speak.
Well, Missouri, we had so many contraband camps because being a border state, and we would have entire, camp followers that would literally live at blockhouses and guard camps and union camps and home guards. And there's numerous reports of the Southern sympathizers complaining about all of these being allowed to stay at the camps and that. It's amazing how we did bring about Lincoln University. It's quite a story. We also recently, about 2 years ago, had an instance to where we had a U.S. colored troops, the 56th, that was at the end of the war, was already down in Helena, Arkansas, and they were not mustered out immediately, and they stayed and helped build a local school. And then afterwards, when they were brought up the Mississippi River, they had contacted typhoid or cholera, and over 175 of them were lost. They were put on Quarantine Island, Cook Island, which is opposite Jefferson Barracks, and they were buried there with markers for many years. But in the 1920s, what happened was the island was eroding, and the bodies were moved and they were not, the removal was not done properly. And it was then that this troop, this 56, was removed over to Jefferson Barracks and given just one mass monument and called an unknown. And they were all unknown. And it took quite a bit of work. And our local genealogical societies and those of us did work really hard to get, because we had to fill out so many forms. We had to produce a descendant of one of the troops to request a, we now have a bronze marker there that lists the names of all of this, the 56 US colored troops that were previously unknown. So, you know, we don't have much, but we've got Lincoln University and we've got that, and we're working on more things.
Thank you. Well, we'll have more things. Just keep working.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Doris. Asa, I cut you off there. Did you have another follow-up question?
I'm curious about that monument that was in back, that looked like it was a contraband monument. The person that just spoke in the background, what was that? It looked like it was a contraband.
No,
I'm
that's
sorry, go ahead.
Nation Monument in Washington, D.C. in Lincoln Park.
Oh,
That
okay.
Archer
Okay.
Alexander Lincoln. That monument was paid for and placed by most of its funds, 2/3, 3/4 of the funding for that monument came from U.S. colored troops stationed down at Natchez following the war. And they were so generous, their leader actually said, slow down. Whoa, let other people give as well. But Reconstruction was beginning to wane, and there was a lot of discussion about what kind of monument there should be. And fortunately, and by 1876, they saw that it had to be up there. Charlotte Scott had called for a monument to Lincoln, and it was the first monument to Lincoln before the Lincoln Memorial in 1920.
Right, and Asa, we have, Doris gave a talk to our group last year, and it's on our website, because that's Archer Alexander there with Lincoln. It was a very good talk.
Thank you.
I do have a follow-up. Oh, go ahead, Doris.
We've been talking with the National Park Service, and we see that the bill that Eleanor Norton had suggested has seems to have waned away, and it appears that the National Park Service is going to place educational and information signs there to further explain that monument's history, which makes us very, very happy.
Thank you, Doris. I do have a follow-up question on the educational aspects. I do know that prior to the Civil War, education was paid for by the wealthy. After the war, a lot of Quakers and other folks came in to rectify the lack of education and came in and opened up schools, which was very good. But I'm wondering if anybody has ever done a study on the repercussions of that, whether seeing these schools open to African-American children and adults led to the opening of free public school systems, because I know it was a debate early on, but I think until, I don't know how many there were that were free public school systems, but it seemed as though the free public school system was a reaction to all of the schools that were being opened up for the African-American children and adults. Has anybody seen any studies on that, and whether that's true or not? And I guess what I'm saying is that the adoption of a free public school system, was that in a way discriminatory or racist and as a reaction to free schools being available to African Americans.
Well,
let me say a couple of words about that.
let me see.
Since I grew up in this system in the South, I know a little bit about it.
Right.
I'll tell you one anecdotal story first. I was born in Georgia, so Jim Carr ran for governor. My dad could vote, and I asked him if he voted for Carr. He said no. I didn't vote for him. He ran for president either because he wasn't. So I never paid that much attention. Well, I was reading something about in his autobiography about 2 years ago, and he said that I didn't know this before I read this book. He said his first office, he came back from the Navy. I don't think he'd gone to college yet. I think he was straight from high school to the Navy. He came back to his little town in Plains, Georgia, and he got appointed to the school board. And so for the first time, I think this was in the late 40s, early 50s, he decided to go visit the public schools for African Americans in that county, where Plains, Georgia is located. And he said he was struck by what he saw. That at least one of these places, school was being conducted in a barn, where live animals were there on one side, and the school was on the other side of the barn. And he said his board members actually ostracized him. They said, "Why are you going to see what these people's schools look like? We don't care nothing about them anyway. We don't care whether they have schools or not." So the evolution of this thing for African Americans meant basically that we had to go through all those terrible conditions in order to be able to get some kind of education. But one of the things that happened in the African American community was this. I know this from my own background growing up. For African Americans going to school, it wasn't just that I was going to school in a church building, on church grounds. My mother told me when she was going to school, the church, at least by the time I got there, they had built a separate building. When she was in school for her first three years, which was the only college school she had, they actually held school in their last 3 pews in the church, the back of the church itself. So that's what you might call the efficient use of this building, which is because they only had church every second and fourth Sunday. We went to school every day, 5 days a week, and went to Sunday school on Sunday. If I didn't go to Sunday school on Sunday, I couldn't go out in the afternoon. We couldn't take my girlfriend to the movies, so we had to go to church. So educating African Americans, Black people, became a way out for us. Our parents said, "This life that you live in here with us is not going to. We don't want you to be able to have to do this when you grow up. So the only way you're going to get out is you got to go to school. That means you got to walk across these hills and go to these places and there's no heat and whatever it is, you got to do that because life is not going to be easy for you, and we expect you to do well in life." So it became and here's what this led to. When I went to college in 1960, 59, 60, there were only 250,000 African Americans in college in the United States. Almost all of us were in historically Black schools, which, by the way, Michael, was almost all in the South. Howard was the only one in the North. As you count, there's a Lincoln up in Pennsylvania, and there's a Lincoln in Missouri, but most all of these schools were in the South. 250,000 African Americans in school in this country. By the time President Obama gets elected, there's 2.5 million Blacks enrolled in college. 2.5 million Blacks. That figure, I'm updating these numbers for our new exhibit, that figure is now over 3 million Black kids who enroll in college. And I think that some of what you're seeing now in the South is some just plain jealousy. And that's based on the fact that the way racial segregation and discrimination worked in the South, Bubba thought his kid ought to be able to get a job ahead of a Black kid. It didn't matter what kind of education an African American had. They shouldn't be ahead of a white person at all. And so part of their anger is this, that we were motivated, and they said we were assisted by the federal government. That's how we got this leg up, Michael, because we were assisted by the federal government. Not that we just outworked them and outsmarted them, but we were assisted by the federal government. The fact that my dad had to work 2 jobs so I could get an education, they don't count that. The fact that and he taught me that you had to get sometimes you had to take 2 pieces of jobs to make a good job out of it, because the man ain't gonna give you no good job. He told me that as a kid. So you're gonna have to take 2 pieces of jobs. And when I met your mom, I was teaching at Federal City College, I had 2 jobs. That was my second job. I was following my dad's advice. Because I had kids I had to educate, and I had things I had to take care of. So the fact of the matter is that I think that what you see in the African American community is that in order to compensate for these hardships and for discrimination, we've had to work. That's the only explanation I can give for that exponential explosion in the number of Black kids who enroll in college. Because if you go down to the second set of numbers, the Black earning power goes up from $9 billion in 1960 to almost $900 billion in 2008. It's over $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion today. So those figures are related to the takeover of these cities. African American mayors in these cities. That's why we can't lose the right to vote in these cities. As we get the numbers, we get to take over these cities in Washington, D.C. and Atlanta, Georgia, and other places. So African American now are able to get jobs in places where they had been barred from jobs before because of the color of their skin. They're now able to get jobs in those cities. And so you see this exponential increase but they wouldn't have been able to take advantage of those jobs if they hadn't all gone off to college and got themselves educated, get themselves in a position where they could actually do this work. So I think this is the real story of America, y'all. This is the America that people think they see when they look at that flag. This is what they think they see. And the people who symbolize that, most of all, are the African Americans, because we've had the farthest to travel and we've had more obstacles in our way as we've worked our way up through this. And that's more like what they're going to see if they want to, when they get here. If they're going to get ahead, they're going to have to follow the path we followed to try to get ahead here in the United States, which is hard work and perseverance and schooling and things like that. And I think that's the real American story. It is a story of this experiment that people talk about creating when they came here in those lofty words like all men are created equal and are endowed by their creators. They put together a constitution that had these the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments in it, the Bill of Rights. It took another 3 amendments to get rid of slavery. And then it took the Civil War, Civil Rights, the 64 Civil Rights Act, and the 65 Voting Rights Act to get rid of Jim Crow. But all of those things led us down the road to progress and made America a better place, one that I think we can proudly talk about as a place where people can get ahead, regardless of their skin color. I think we have to protect that. We have to preserve it. We have to keep working on it, because that's the real story of America. That's what really excites the world about this country.
Well,
May I just say something shortly about, I'm an alumni of the Military Road School in Brightwood. And, the war was fought there. That was where the president was shot at. And of course, the Confederates were run out of the city. But in trying to get that school nominated as a historical site, I had to do research. And I did a little bit of research on schools here in Washington. That school began after the soldiers had finished with an army barracks. There are several schools in Washington, D.C. that were started the same way. And these people, some churches, there's some people met in basements or whatever they could in schools. They were determined. There wasn't anything that wasn't going to hold them back from getting an education so that they could learn how to read. And that certainly was part of the story of Frederick Douglass, how he would bribe kids to tell him what this word was or something like that. So education, that was the life. That was the essence of life. And they didn't have it. So they sacrificed. They did what they had to do. Later, missionaries came to the Washington, D.C. area and helped with educating the children or whatever. But even the report cards in that period were totally different from today's, because when the system finally began to create the Black schools, there were elements in there that you would never see in today's report card, because they were interested. The people, the parents were interested in making a whole citizen, not a book citizen, but a whole citizen. And the heart of what the church was the heart of what they had to do. The church and the school worked together, and the parents. So the three put it together so that their children could make a decent living and be able to survive without depending upon someone else to take care of them. They had come out of slavery. They didn't intend to go back. And it was tough, as Dr. Smith is saying. It was tough because they had to make it on their own. So education to the Black families, that was essential. There was no doubt in their minds. They needed an education. They were going after it. They didn't care how they got it. They were going after it.
Well, thank you, Patricia. I want to say I've heard something that just surprised me from a colleague, African-American colleague, who said he thought that there was something missing in schools that were not segregated. He said some of the things that you were talking about, Patricia, some of the things that aren't being taught in some schools. And he said, and there are no Black teachers. Mm-hmm. And there was discrimination and racism in some of these schools that were not segregated. And he said that was hurting things in some respects. I was surprised to hear that. He was all for segregated schools. I wish.
Well, let me say I've heard that too. And my only answer to that is this. It's what I told you earlier. I walked to school while white kids rode to school. So if he wanted his kids to walk to school while the white kids went to school, that's up to him. I wouldn't have that for my children. We had hand-me-down books that came down from the white kids on their names were some missing pages. So if he wants that for his kid, he can have that. I wouldn't have that. I couldn't do it. That's not going to work for us. I've heard people say that about how we were better off in the days of segregation. Well, that's because they ain't never rode the back of the bus. They ain't never trucked no colored water. Well, we ain't talking about that. But what the hell are you talking about, man? You know what I'm saying? What are you talking about? So I don't think I don't think people mean that when they say it. And if they do, their children certainly don't want to hear that.
I hear what you're saying, and maybe the focus was we need more diversity in the teachers.
Right.
And
I think well, I think there's something to be. I think the public school system is already being brought under critical examination, and it should be really because it should be. It should be a liberating force for everybody. And in order for it to be a liberating force for everybody, it has to examine itself every once in a while and make sure it's producing and delivering for society today and tomorrow. Because that's what the school system, that's what we envision it to be. And I think it should have to examine itself every now and then. But I told you about those figures with over 3.5 million African American kids that are enrolled in college today. I said college. They're enrolled in college today. There was only 250,000 Blacks enrolled in school when I was in school because they couldn't go to historically white schools. And now, especially in these state schools, and many of these state schools, in Mississippi, Jackson State College, Ole Miss now has as many Black students as some of those historically Black colleges does in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've gone well beyond Civil War history here, but we should have another follow-up talk just on current events and current educational issues because there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
Asa, raise your hand. Yeah.
Yeah. The high school I went to was Alfred E. Beach in Georgia. I found later that it actually was an abolitionist school that had put a contraband school that was out of work that had been established by Susan King Taylor. And she was the first Black educator from Savannah, one of the only women who actually wrote about her experiences during the Civil War by Susan King Taylor. And so, we should note that I think Marge Chester, who was a Black correspondent, there's an interesting entry when they liberate Richmond. In one of his chapters, he talks about the underground schools that had been established by slaves in Richmond, in the capital of the Confederacy. and how they used to smuggle their books in paper bags, and how their parents were concerned because they were telling their parents they could carry their books in the open now. And when I started looking into that, there were underground schools that had been established in many of the southern cities. That's why when we look at public school, we have to look at the legacy of Black legislators in South Carolina and Louisiana, where one of the first things they legislated on was the establishment of public schools. And so we have that legacy to owe to those veterans of the USCT and establishing it, this legacy of public schools when they became legislators in these Reconstruction Congress.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. They're all different sides of this and things that I didn't know about. That's the more you learn how much you still need to learn. Melanie, you have some interesting backgrounds too with your dad. Do you want to open your mic and talk about that?
Oh, I kind of grew up a little different in our suburban white neighborhood outside Chicago because my father was a principal of 4 Black elementary schools in Chicago, and then he was principal of Calumet when Martin Luther King was assassinated. So he rode through a lot. He differed with the way things were done in the administration, but he really wanted to have Black teachers in his school, and so he would recruit them, and he realized that with the redlining, they were forced, to live as, and with Black families in certain neighborhoods of Chicago, and he'd go into those neighborhoods, pick up the teachers, put them in, like 4 in a car, in his car, his Ford, and then, drive them to his school and then prep them, spend an hour prepping them before the day would start. Then he'd get them to their jobs. Then he'd run back to his school and run his school. Then they'd pass the test, and then he'd hire them. And he'd never talk about that they were Black or white. He would just hire them, and then they'd come into the school and people would be like, whoa, so it was, it was unusual. It was not, but it was just something he thought he had to do. But there were just so many hurdles, economic, social, that he had to go against. And then my mom, she also taught in, Dvorak School in the South Side of Chicago, and it was hard, very, very hard. So, I really see a lot of very deep connections between those USCT troops going in and starting, like the Civil War, creating the upheaval economically in families throughout the nation, rural to urban, Black and white, poor and rich. And I find that anytime that, for instance, a president is heavily criticized, like Truman or Grant or Johnson, Lyndon Baines Johnson, you can trace also heavy criticism of their efforts to uplift or to assist or to give a boost to African American citizens in the nation. So I don't know if that's true, but I sort of noticed a pattern. Because wasn't it Truman who truly integrated the military service? I think he did.
He did issue the executive order in, I think, 49.
Right.
Yes, it was President Truman.
And then when you read Wes Haygood, Showdown, and how Thurgood Marshall, how Johnson fought so hard to get Thurgood Marshall in as a Supreme Court justice. Oh man, it's like it's like but my dad fought it too. It wore him down eventually. He had to just become an administrator. It was just too hard. So
well, we could use a Lyndon Baines Johnson right about now in this country.
For domestic.
Yeah, we could use them for sure.
But like University of Chicago was really big on trying to investigate integration of schools, and so they did a big study with under Johnson's administration. My dad was part of that study. He helped write it. I've got the letter from Johnson with made with the electric pen that says, "Thank you for providing this report." I read the report and it's like, how do you seat Black children with white children at a table. It's like things that we don't even think about now, that we just do. I just substitute taught in a school in Fairfax County, and there were 3 white kids, and then the whole rest of the class was, were children of color, of all shades of brown, and it's all, it's to me, it's an exciting time now. If we could just get through this, and take what we've learned and move forward,
Melanie, my daughter teaches for Fairfax County Public School System, so I hear the diversity in the school system now is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But that reminds me, though, there are things that we see now and we don't realize that those things didn't exist before. But there are a lot of things now we still have to say there's a lot of work still that needs to be done. And down the road, people will say, really, you needed to do that? But what are those things? Dr. Smith, maybe you could speak to that. What would help? What little things? I mean, I was at a Starbucks the other day, and there was this tall Black guy that he wasn't being waited on. And I just said, that's weird. And I said, what's going on? And he said, he thought it was just him imagining. I said, no, that's weird. And he said, it is what it is. And I said, no, that shouldn't be that. But what can we do now to try to make things a little bit better?
Well, I think that I'm a father and a grandfather and a great grandfather now, and so so one of my roles in life is just try to give them enough to work with so they can continue to believe in themselves and try to help make the world a better place. And so that's I think we can all do that with our own families and our own community. Start there with things like that, where you teach your kids to respect other people, to respect other cultures, to understand that this is a diverse world, not just a diverse city or a diverse nation, but a diverse world. And I find it interesting that after World War II, we've got John Foster Dulles, President Truman's Secretary of State, saying this segregation thing is ruining my diplomacy, because the Russians are seizing upon the fact that we mistreat these Black people, and certainly in our own military. And it was part of what convinced Truman that he ought to go ahead and do something about desegregating the military. And yet we had I've got this story about the governor of Georgia, Eugene Talmadge, who later becomes senator, talking about getting Black people off the voting rolls because they're going to come back from Vietnam. I mean, from the Germany, having fought Hitler, thinking that they have a right to vote in Georgia. So the exhibit that we're doing about Lieutenant Jimmy Wheeler, who went down over there, and is going to end by saying he was in a segregated branch of the military. He never breathed a breath of freedom in his life because he gave his life over there, and he was not able to come back from the war. But you got Herman Talmadge saying he's going to take people out of voting rolls during the same time in Georgia because he thinks they're going to come back and demand their right to vote. So they reduced the number of registered voters in the state of Georgia from 135,000 to 3,000 2 years. From 135,000 to 3,000 2 years. This is what they're trying to do down there right now, because they want to reduce the voting rolls enough so people can get so they can get the result that they want. And if they don't like the result that they get, they're going to have a way now to turn over the election, which really is awful for me. So we've got to continue to fight this. And I think that one of the things we have to tell people is that we have got to find a way to rise up enough. The good people of America have to rise up in these states of Georgia and Alabama, Mississippi, and Washington, D.C., and other places, and try to get some people in office who really believe in freedom and believe in democracy, and try to get rid of these people who really turn back the clock and turn this into a country where only white men have the right to vote. And if they don't get the result that they want, they're going to turn over the election. And I know that sounds kind of crass, but that's what I think is happening. And because, Gordon and I studying this a lot. These people in the 1920s was just running every polling places, taking boxes of votes. We're not turning these votes in because we don't like the way they were collected. We know this is a voting precinct that votes the way we don't want them to vote. And so I think we can see some of that in the coming years. So there's plenty of stuff out there for us to be working on. We just have to remain vigilant. If we see something wrong, we have to call it out, and we have to be willing to stand up and defend this great democracy that we have here and this flag that has come to mean so much to all of our people, not only here in America, but around the world.
Well, that may be a good way to wrap this up because we're running late to redeeming the flag. That's the last comment you said. We've got to start redeeming the flag.